Edit: two things I forgot to mention. Even though it was a relatively serious session, there were a lot more Monty Python references than is reasonable. This started when they were concocting their plan to attack the keep, and I was trying to keep it all straight in my head. I said, okay, so let me get this straight. Lancelot, Galahad, and I jump out of the rabbit. And everyone lost it. They later modified their plan for dealing with the Manticore. Let us taunt it. Perhaps it will become so cross that it will make a mistake. And of course there was the observation that Vroth Keep was only a model. I'm glad this doesn't happen too frequently, but every once in a while it's fun. The party wants to use some kind of explosives against the bridge. This isn't unreasonable, but I would rather it was the kind of explosives that took time and care to set up, rather than a bomb that they could lob at the bridge and then run away. This is mainly because the Paladin has a big problem with bringing the bridge down with a pickaxe, for whatever reason. Are there any alchemical, or minor magical, items that could be used for this purpose? If not, anyone have clever ideas for this? None come to mind. Apologies for the delay in posting. We played last Sunday, but real life has been hitting me hard, and I simply haven't had a moment to sit down and update. It was an excellent session, though. The party made it to Skull Gorge Bridge. What happened next? Read on. I'm going to stop posting the characters in attendance for now, unless stated otherwise. Assume that everyone was there. I posted links to their character sheets a few posts ago, so if you're curious to see their stats and whatnot, feel free to check them out. So, for the last time, the party as it stands is: Emsril, Human Wizard. Sarth, Human Favored Soul. Gale, Elven Ranger/Scout. Cameron, Human Rogue/Swashbuckler. Ross, Human Paladin. Last session had our heroes planning on a daring midnight ride through the Witchwood. This session, after collecting supplies, including the gift of a scroll of stone shape from Sir Aaron the Wise, they set off. Delorazan bid them farewell, and pulled Sarth aside for a private word, suggesting that he come back safely. Just as they were leaving, a chimera swooped down on the town. They killed it pretty quickly. Not particularly exciting, unfortunately. They made it to Cold Creek with Gale ranging ahead on foot. His unmounted speed is the same as everyone else's mounted speed, and there they halted. Something didn't look right underneath the bridge. Hor took one look at it and pegged it as a shambling mound, hidden in the vegetation on the riverbank. They didn't have time to go to the next crossing, and the water was too swift and deep to ford. They decided to try to run across the bridge before the creature could react. This proved to be a mistake. It sprang out from under the bridge and badly wounded Ross's horse, dropping it to negatives. Ross fell into the mud. The other mounts began to panic, and most of the party had trouble bringing them under control. They managed to drive off the creature, but not before nearly losing both Ross and his horse. This was only a minor setback. However, they made it across the creek, and to within striking distance of Skull Gorge Bridge, well before sunrise. They set up a camp and a watch, and rested. They arrived at the bridge the next morning, and were surprised to see it so lightly defended, until they saw the dragon. After some quick planning, they settled on a direct frontal assault. They spent some time casting buffs, and then charged. The defenders reacted quickly, and Ozarandian hit hard with his first blast of acid breath, but Imsril blocked off the bridge with Stinking Cloud, splitting the hobgoblins. They took to the guard towers with their longbows. Ross and Cameron finished off the hellhounds quickly, and Gale cleared out one of the towers. Cameron charged into the other to engage the guard one-on-one. Imsril took cover in the now empty guard tower from the arrows of the hobgoblins on the other side, and Ozarandian saw his chance. He flew across the gorge and into the tower, blocking the stairs and trapping Imsril, or so he thought. Imsril smiled, stepped back, and cast Benign Transposition, and Ozarandian was suddenly face to face with an enlarged, haste, bull-strength paladin. At the same time, Cameron defeated the guard in the other tower, and effortlessly leaped across the bridge into the other tower. At the same time, Gale came up the stairs from below. Ozarandian duked it out for a round before he realized that he was outnumbered and outgunned. He tried to flee, but Imsril dropped him with a magic missile, and he plummeted into the gorge. They made their way back down onto the bridge, and as Imsril maneuvered himself into spellcasting position, the Stinking Cloud wore off, and the hobgoblin sergeant charged, wounding Imsril badly. He retreated, and Ross and Gale were still in the other tower, exchanging fire with the hobgoblins on the other side. The task of holding the bridge fell to Sarth and Cameron. Sarth waded in with his spiked quarterstaff and started swinging, while the sergeant and Cameron ducked and weaved back and forth, using tumble to gain or avoid flanking. One slip up, though, and Cameron found herself on the edge of the bridge, with her back to the gorge. The sergeant seized the opportunity and bull rushed. I rolled a modified 23 for the hobgoblin. Cameron's player rolled an 18, +2 for strength and +2 for using her brute gloves. That probably makes it, right, he said. I said nothing, only moved his mini back 1 square, off the edge of the bridge. I realized that this wasn't a particularly dramatic way to kill Cam, so I cut her a few breaks. First, I gave her a reflex save to catch the edge, natural 1. Then, I ruled that she wouldn't fall until her turn. This gave Ross and Gale a chance to react before she fell. Ross couldn't do much, since he was too far away. This meant that it fell to Gale, still in the guard tower, to try to save his best friend. He leapt off the tower and down onto the bridge, ripped the ring of feather fall off of Imsral's hand, and threw it with all his might to Cameron, who caught it just before he fell. Seem like frantic backpedaling on my part? Expand the spoiler. Spoiler. Show. Still, Kim was out of the fight for a good while, even after she managed to pull herself out of the water. Once Ross joined the fight on the bridge, though, it was all over. The sergeant fell, and the survivors fled, only to be cut down by a pursuing gale. They lowered a rope and hauled Cameron back onto the bridge, and looted the bodies of the fallen. Ozarandians had been washed away. By dramatic convention, this should mean that he's still alive, but he's really not. If the magic missile hadn't killed him, which it did, the fall would have. They set about figuring out how to destroy the bridge. They found the weak spot, but decided to use stone shape on the far end of the bridge, reasoning that the weak spot would collapse when forced to bear the weight of the bridge. After that failed, they gave Ross a pickaxe and he set to work, and within minutes, the bridge collapsed into the gorge below. They mounted up and started back to Drellin's Ferry, but passed the forest giant marker that they had missed in the darkness of the night before. Suspecting that there might be some remaining giants after the evidence they found in Vroth Keep, they investigated, and found old Warcleg Gnaw preparing his supper. Cameron and Sarth approached him, and once they convinced him that they weren't trying to kill him, he let them speak their piece. He seemed amenable to their plea for aid, but was unconvinced until they presented him with the gauntlet they found in Vroth Keep. That sealed the deal. I started envisioning the bit with Bjorn from The Hobbit, where the dwarves come in 2 by 2. But the rest of the party got impatient and just showed up, and there was roasted boar for all. They returned to Drellin's Ferry the next day, talked to Nora Winston, and agreed to meet with the council the next morning. They rested, except for Sarth, who paid a call to Delorazan, and awoke early for the meeting. They successfully convinced the council, even the obstinate Iormal and Craven Kellen Shadowbanks, of the dire threat and the need to evacuate. They volunteered to assist with the onerous work of packing up and moving, and after a hard day's work of preparing Delorazan's animals for the long journey, they collapsed into their rooms at the inn. They were awoken by shouts in the night, goblins attacking the west bank. We ended the session for the evening. Session 5. In which our heroes meet new foes, make new friends, and realize that no plan survives contact with the enemy. Last session, the party had defeated the foes defending the blockade on the Old Rist Trail, hopefully opening up a diplomatic channel to the northern kingdom of Keld Dinar. However, they suspected from the map they found that there was more trouble lurking in the Black Fens. They rested and identified the treasure they had found from the blockade defenders before destroying the blockade the next morning. Sarth did so in a particularly Sarth-like way. He stripped naked, walked in with a torch, and set things on fire until the watchtower started filling up with smoke. His fire resistance protected him from harm. With roiling black smoke streaming upwards, they decided to make themselves scarce. They set off north, and followed the road into the Black Fens. The going was slow once they got into the swamp, and they were forced to dismount. Trudging through on foot, beset by midges and black flies, I've had a lot of real-world experience that I used to color this for them. They found an oddly dismembered corpse of a giant owl, with the 2 green spawn razor fiends that killed it lurking nearby. Imsral crippled one with glitter dust, but the other tore into them. They brought him down, but not without serious wounds. Fortunately there's a spell for that. Also, I forgot about their augmented critical until after the fact, and kicked myself for it. Meanwhile, the other one recovered enough to track them by ear, and began playing a deadly game of blind man's bluff. He got off a breath weapon or 2, but was quickly dispatched. They searched the islet with the owl corpse, and found both the jade band identifying the owl, Gale could read the inscription, and the iron coffer containing some substantial treasures. While studying these, Killer Arrowswift and his Tiri Kiter posse arrived. At first, they were worried that the elves would want their treasure back, but the elves were only concerned about the fate of their companion. A little discussion and a few diplomacy checks later, Killer decided that these outsiders were not hostile. Furthermore, the news they brought of a hobgoblin horde sounded important. Killer and the party mounted up on the owls, leaving the horses in the care of the elves, and they took wing towards Starsong Hill. The Tiri Kiter have a bad habit of shoving words together to make names. Arrowswift, Starsong, and Starzinger, Night Shadow, Snowmantle, Harrowblade, and so on. At first glance, this module seems to fall into elves or better territory, but look closer at their stats, the horde could kick these guys' asses from noon to Sunday. No wonder they need the PCs to come deal with RHOD, they can't handle it. They arrived at Starsong Hill after dark. I always thought the hillside lit by jars of fireflies thing was kind of silly, but the players seemed genuinely impressed. They were greeted by Celeria Starzinger, who told them what she knew of the peril lurking in RHOD. The players were keen on enlisting the aid of the Tiri Kiter against the horde, so Celeria hinted that she might be able to provide assistance, if the party could deal with RHOD. Trellera Night Shadow was also present for this discussion, lost in grief for her brother, killed by the Razor Fiends. Sarth spoke to her for a moment, expressing his sympathy and assuring her that they would attend the funeral the next day. The next day, Imsril, Cameron, and Gale bought supplies, while Sarth and Ross sought out Ilian Snowmantle, the priest of Corellin Larathian. They assisted him in tending to the wounded in his care, while engaging in a lively discussion about spirituality. Sarth is a follower of Harlingan, whereas Ross worships Arrhenius. Then it was time for Lanakar's funeral. Trellera led the elves in song, an improvised, chant-like piece that told the story of Lanakar's life. All of the players joined in one way or another. Some can carry a tune, some can't. Imsril joined in with a summoned illusory string quartet. I couldn't decide if this was tasteless or awesome. Lacking a body, they burned a bonfire anointed with holy water. The funeral itself was followed by a great feast and celebration, and Cameron and Gale impressed the elves mightily with a tumbling routine. During the festivities, Trellera pulled them aside. She told them that she wanted to accompany them to RHOD and avenge her brother's death. They were concerned over whether her anger would blind her, but she assured them that she could handle herself, so they agreed. They set off by boat, with Trellera as a guide, and before long found the ruins of RHOD. Cameron and Gale scouted it out a little, enough to see the lizardmen but not enough to learn anything about the occupied buildings other than that they were occupied. They came up with a simple plan that would get them to the bell tower undetected, water walk plus invisibility sphere. They crept over to the eastern bank of the lake, and after casting these and a ton of other buffs, they set off. The tower guards could hear them approaching, but they couldn't see them. Imsril cast Ghost Sound to aid in the confusion. One of the hobgoblins pounded on the bell with the hilt of his sword, which gonged with a resounding peal that could be heard for miles. The battle was on. They dispatched the bell tower defenders quickly, but Sarvith and Regerax had taken wing and were speeding towards the tower, followed closely by a flying, invisible Nurkleneck. Once they got in range, Imsril hit the dragon with solid fog, Sarvith countered with wind wall, and Regerax charged, grappling Imsril. Imsril escaped with baleful transposition, swapping himself with Ross. Regerax found Ross to be a bit too much to handle, and dropped him, and now the real battle began. The battle took place on and around the tower, and some surrounding ruined buildings. The party was careful not to let themselves get bunched up, to minimize the effect of Regerax's breath. Since they had water walk, this meant spreading out over the surface of the lake. However, this worked to Regerax's advantage. He could submerge freely and attack from underwater with impunity, surfacing from time to time to let Sarvith breathe and shoot. Effectively, he was Jaws. He was, quite literally, in his element. The battle raged on. The players had numbers on their side, but the terrain was against them. Ross and Sarth readied themselves, hoping to get off attacks when Regerax surfaced. Gale peppered them with arrows, but Sarvith returned fire. He seemed to have a special hatred for Gale. Imsril cast spell after spell, got grappled again, escaped again, but now it was Cameron in the dragon's clutches, who did not fare quite so well. Regerax landed on a rooftop and tore into Cameron, who, knowing when to fold played dead. Throughout the battle, Trellera hid behind the bell on top of the tower and sang out with inspire courage, her voice tremulous but clear. When Imsril got caught in Rajarak's blast and fell into the lake, he was flying, and so did not have water walk. It was she that ran out to save him from drowning, and was nearly killed by Rajarax in the process. 16 HP? Seriously? Meanwhile, Nirkelnak arrived and started wreaking havoc with suggestion and illusions. They brought him down, but not before Sarth and Gale had started running towards the town hall to get help. Thank you, Sif. I'm not sure what the actual ruling on this is, but I decided that his death ended the suggestions, and they rejoined the fight. With Cameron down, things looked grim, but Gale dropped Sarvith with a lucky shot, and the tide of battle turned. Rajarax flew into a rage, and grappled Gale. You killed him. You killed him, he shouted, over and over, and tore Gale to shreds, clawing and biting over and over until there was nothing left to claw. This was the moment that Ross and Sarth had been waiting for. They charged, and Rajarax fell, but they were too late to save Gale. Imsril saw a small fleet of rafts converging on the bell tower, each bearing half a dozen lizard folk. They grabbed what they could of Gale's body and made for the bell tower, there to make a desperate last stand. Session 6. In which our heroes wriggle their way out of a tight spot, and dark secrets are revealed. Lest you feared that this campaign journal had dropped off the face of the earth, fear not. It will take more than a 3-week lapse in games to keep us down. If you recall correctly, things looked grim for our heroes when we last left off. Surrounded by rapidly approaching lizard folk, with Gale dead and everyone else wounded and low on spells, there was serious concern among my players as to whether or not this would end in a TPK. Some went so far as to roll up backup characters. Here's how things played out. They immediately looted Rajarax, and carried Sarvith's unconscious form and the parts of Gale's body that they could find back over to the bell tower. Recall that they still had water walk active. They searched through the lower level, hoping to find something of use, but they couldn't open the locked chest. They assembled on the roof and pulled out their bows. Nymeria, Imsril's hawk, returned with more bad news. The ogres from the town hall had boarded rafts and were headed towards the bell tower. My plan was for the enemies to attack in waves, a few minutes apart, first the lizard folk, followed by the green spawn razor fiend, who the ogres had released from the hatchery, and who was swimming towards the bell tower, out of sight, then the ogres themselves. Before the lizard folk came within earshot, the party realized that Sarvith provided them with a powerful bargaining chip. When the lizard folk approached, they held up his body for them to see. Kem called out that they would kill Sarvith unless the lizard folk let them go, and rolled a diplomacy check. Now, the lizard folk hate Sarvith. He flew in one day and declared himself king of the hill. I chose to have the lizard folk interpret this as, we'll kill Sarvith if you let us go, perhaps due to some linguistic difficulties. To the players' surprise, they readily agreed, under the condition that the players never return to Rist. At first the players were uncertain, they still wanted to check out the town hall, and find the dragon's hoard, but once they realized that the lizard folk hadn't specified a time frame, they agreed, and the lizard folk left. The ogres, and the razor fiend, unbeknownst to them, kept approaching, of course, and shots were fired as they came within range. The skull crusher ogres returned fire with their throwing stones. I still think that their 100 feet range has to be a typo. One of them hit for 17 damage from 300 feet away. That's a football field. Imagine trying to hit a moving, dodging target with a thrown soccer ball from a football field away. They are ogres, though, and kept advancing. While the players were distracted by the ogres, the razor fiend sprang out of the water and attacked. He dealt some solid blows, but the players quickly realized that if they stayed away from the edge of the tower, he would have to come up on the roof to attack them. Once he did, they piled up on him and took him out. Imsril brought down an ogre with his crossbow. I've never seen so many nat 20s before, but there were still 3 coming. They harried them with ranged attacks until the skull crushers ran out of rocks. Then, Sarth and Ross formed a choke point on the stairs and held them off as they tried to make it onto dry land. Scratch 3 ogres. Before heading over to the town hall, Sarth used the Staff of Life to raise Gale. While he was doing so, Imsril decided it was time to have a chat with Sarvith. He healed him back to consciousness, and explained that in a few minutes, they would be bringing back to life a very violent elf. Imsril promised him a quick death in exchange for information, warning him that Gale would not likely be so generous. Sarvith, despondent over the death of Rajarax, agreed. With his best friend gone, he had nothing to live for. This is how the party learned of the Red Hand's alliance with the Ghost Lord. Imsral held up his end of the bargain, and killed Sarvith. Sarth resurrected Gale. They boarded the rafts conveniently provided by the ogres and sailed over to the town hall. They weren't expecting the Eden, and very nearly fled, but a brutal sneak attack by Cameron, 69 damage on a full attack. I've got to check those numbers sometime, turned the tide quickly. They searched the hall, and with judicious use of detect magic, found Regerak's hoard. I modified it extensively, details in the spoiler block. Spoiler. Show. They gathered up the loot and headed back to Starsong Hill. Celeria and Ilian knew little about the Ghost Lord, and suggested that the party try to learn more in Brindal. The party earned a total of 15 alliance points throughout Chapter 2, enough to earn both the alliance of the Tiri Kiter and the loan of their giant owls. The party set off for Brindal with two goals in mind: to track down the Ghost Lord. They had the vague idea that he operated out of the Thorn Wastes, and to learn what they could about him from his phylactery. When they arrived, they were relieved to see that the city seemed to be taking the threat of the Red Hand seriously. The signs of preparations for war were everywhere. Imsral and Sarth sought out Immerstal the Red, after trading riddles with Alandri the Ginnisphinx, both to trade magical equipment and to see if he knew anything about the Ghost Lord. Their meeting was fruitful. Red, a wizened sage, knew much that the common folklore had let pass, and suggested possible venues for tracking down a specific location. Ross went to get his new armor refitted, while Gale and Cameron worked the crowds applying a hem sleight of hand. They weren't careful enough, apparently. A halfling approached Gale and told him that he'd better watch out, that people didn't do that sort of thing without Verazakal knowing about it. To my surprise, Cameron announced her intentions to meet this Kal woman. I explained that Kal was an important woman, not the sort that you just approach on the street, but allowed that she might be found at Valorian's Playhouse, attending that evening's performance of the most lamentable comedy and most cruel death of Pyramus and Thisbe. Kem immediately found a boutique and spent a pile of gold on appropriately fancy attire for the occasion, and purchased a ticket to the show. Luckily for her, Kal was in attendance, surrounded by a considerable entourage. Session 7. In which our heroes enter the lair of the Ghost Lord, and everything goes horribly awry. Wow. What a session. In a way, everything went as expected. In another, everything caught me completely by surprise. Recall that last session, our players were in Brindal, searching for clues as to the whereabouts of the Ghost Lord. Here's how things played out. Cameron managed to have a chat with Lady Kal at the theater. I wasn't sure what, exactly, Kem was going for, but found out soon enough when she told Kal that war was coming, and she best help defend Brindal. Kal was almost offended. This is a woman who prides herself on knowing everything before anyone else. She blew Kem off and left in a huff. Not a good first impression. Sarth and Imsral agreed to meet with a friend of Immerstal the Red's, a traveling sage named Ella, the next day. Meanwhile, Ross and Gale ran into some old friends at the Stone Wyvern, Delorazan and Captain Sorina from Drellin's Ferry. They caught up on old times, as did Delora and Sarth, once they returned, while Imsral headed over to the Thirsty Zombie and surprised everyone by playing an honest game of cards. He then tried to entertain the patrons with illusions, but he was not well received. He dimension doored out. They heard that Nora Winston was in town, and so sought him out the next morning in hopes that he could grant them an audience with Lord Jarmuth. They found him, and he promised to try. They set off to meet with Ella. Interlace other minor errands, shopping, meeting Treater Goldbrow, High Priestess of Pelair, and so on, as appropriate here. The first day's worth of searching was mostly fruitless, but Ella had loads of general information regarding liches to share, and share she did. Opinions were still split as to whether or not it was even worth considering trying to attack the lich. The party headed over to the keep to discuss the situation with Jarmuth. They brought him news from the north. The roads were clear, and they had earned the alliance of the Tiri Kiter. He agreed to send an emissary north to Keld Dinar, although he was not expecting aid from them. He also told them that he had sent a delegation to the Hammerfast Holds, but had expected to have heard from them by now. They brought him up to speed on the Ghost Lord situation, and he agreed that negotiation was probably their best bet. The next day's worth of searching yielded results. Around noon, they found an ancient map in a dusty antiquities shop that gave them a rough idea of where they might find the Ghost Lord's lair. Without further ado, they set off on Owlback, traveling through the day and into the night. On the second day of their travels, they spotted a pair of Ettins and a troop of goblins looting a horse-drawn cart beneath a small copse of poplar, with human bodies strewn about. Sarth, Gale, and Ross brought their owls down from a distance, while Cameron flew overhead and performed a combat dive directly over one of the Ettins, coming down safely with her ring of feather fall. It was pretty frickin' awesome. That, along with a sculpted energy substitution cold fireball from Imsrel, made short work of the enemy. They quickly realized that the dead humans were the emissary of which Jarmuth had spoken, and though it seemed for a while that their greed would win out over their devotion to the Veil, they decided to bring the message, which they did not open. It was sealed, and the treasure to the intended recipients. They arrived at the Hammerfast Holds that evening, and delivered the message. The Shining Axes Company began to mobilize at once, and the dwarves offered the party a roof and a bed, which they gladly accepted. The party decided to take some time to plan their next move. They came up with a simple scheme. Hide the phylactery somewhere outside the Thorn Wastes. Negotiate with the Ghost Lord, offer him back his phylactery in exchange for whatever they can get. At the very least, ask him to stop helping the Red Hand. At most, see if they can get him on their side. Of course, the Ghost Lord won't agree to anything without a phylactery in hand, so after they deal, they all leave. Imsrel and 2 others return with the phylactery. If the Ghost Lord tries any funny business, dimension door the hell out of there. Bug simple, and foolproof. Of course, there was one thing they didn't account for, the presence of the Red Hand. They flew out to the Thorn Wastes, but a storm, honest roll. First thunderstorm all campaign, forced their owls to ground, and they spent an unpleasant night camping on the edge of the wasteland. The storm diminished overnight, but renewed itself by morning, preventing Imsrel from preparing spells and forcing them to go in on foot. They left Nymeria with the owls so they could summon them relatively easily. They slogged through the Thorn Wastes for hours before finding the blighted area surrounding the lair, and more hours before finding the lair itself. Cameron scouted out ahead, climbing up to the mouth and, to my utter surprise, opening the door and finding herself face to face with 3 Doomfist monks. She won initiative, and drank a potion of invisibility. The rest of the party was unaware of this, of course. One monk ran to alert the others, while the other 2 took up positions inside the room. Cameron then noticed the rope ladder, and kicked it down. The other party started climbing up. The remaining monks, realizing that they were dealing with an invisible foe, retreated downstairs to meet up with the others. When the rest of the party arrived, they found an empty room. They proceeded cautiously. The room at the bottom of the stairs was filled with fog, which they dispelled with ease. Unbeknownst to them, Ulwy and her minions lurked a single door away, but Gale sensed a secret door, and he was so excited that they all decided to check that one out first. They were promptly ambushed by the Ghost Lions, which led to a nasty fight. The Dire Lion was draining stats left and right, and everyone had either 50% mischance, due to incorporeality, or 50% mischance, twice, due to avoiding gaze attack, plus incorporeality. Furthermore, Cameron and Ross were frightened by the brute lions, and would have run off were they not surrounded. However, Imsrel cast Command Undead on one of the brute lions, and commanded it to attack the other one. They eventually brought them down. They proceeded down the corridor and found another secret door. They opened it and found themselves face to face with Varanthian, the half-fiend Behir. Things went south. He opened up with a blast of lightning, catching Ross and the commanded Ghost Lion, who vanished. They charged in. Cameron was the first to get swallowed. She dropped to negatives immediately. Ross ran to help and got grappled for his troubles. Sarth and Gale attacked, but the beast shrugged off their blows. We rolled around to Ross' turn again. Things looked grim. If they couldn't kill this thing, Cameron would be dead in a round. Ross' player turned to me and asked if he could get to Cameron somehow. I replied that if he was trying to get Varanthian to swallow him, well, she certainly wouldn't object, pending a failed grapple check, which Ross failed with ease. Without a second thought, Ross leapt into the Behir's jaws, and with a gulp, he was swallowed whole. He used lay on hands to bring Cameron back to consciousness, but he wasn't doing so well on hit points himself. The first round of acid damage dropped him to negatives, and there wasn't anyone to save him. He died the next round. Cameron, however, managed to do exactly enough damage to cut her way free, and Imsrel had blinded it with glitter dust, enabling Sarth to get into melee. With Cameron's sneak attack damage, they managed to bring it down, although Sarth nearly got swallowed as well. Realizing that their plan was shot to hell, they retreated to the Hammerfast Holds, with Ross' body. They rested up and wondered what the hell they were going to do next. RHOD's player had begun preparing a backup character, but it wasn't quite ready yet, and introducing a new character into an established party is difficult enough. I decided to end the session a little earlier than I'd like, rather than try to shoehorn him in right then and there. Session 8. In which our heroes emerge from multiple frying pans into an infinitely descending series of fires. Another fantastic session. They made it through the rest of Chapter 3, no surrender, no retreat. Before long, we'll be at the Battle of Brindal. Recall that last session, our heroes had retreated to the Hammer Fastholds to rest and regroup. We had some new faces in attendance. RHOD's player rolled up a variant unarmed swordsage named Blaine News Fredericks, a devotee of Saint Cuthbert and an instrument of his divine will. He's mostly focused on diamond mind and setting sun maneuvers, extraordinary rather than supernatural. The idea was a martial character, not a magical one. Furthermore, Gale's player had asked if his girlfriend, who was visiting, could sit in on our session. Not wanting her to be bored, I asked her in advance if she wanted to partake, and she agreed. I rolled her up a Dwarven Fighter, Dungeon Crasher variant from Dungeon's Cape. Holy cow, that's a lot of D6, named Carla, the female version of the traditional Dwarven name Carlos. Carla is a mercenary in the Shining Axes, but was laid low by a recent battle when they departed, so she joined up with the party under the understanding that they would be returning to Brindal before too long. After some arguments about whether or not female dwarves have beards, they do, of course, we began. Here's how things played out. The party returned to the Thorn Wastes, delayed only slightly by another thunderstorm. Another 94. What are the odds? They climbed up into the mouth of the lion, and, expecting resistance, prepared themselves for battle. The Doomfist monks, expecting their approach, sent one of their number down to warn Ulwy, and readied themselves. The players, of course, made short work of 2 level 4 monks. Even when buffed, they lasted less than a round. They did, however, get a taste of the capabilities of the dragon chains, which are just nasty, and learned early on to respect them. I felt a little bad for sending all these grapple-heavy foes, ogres, the dragons, the monks, the bone drinkers later on, up against the party. It is a major weak spot, even considering that Sarth has freedom of movement. I don't feel that bad, though. They made their way down into the antechamber, and were surprised to find it filled with fog again. They decided to wait and see if it would disperse naturally. They waited at the top of the stairs, and heard Ulwy using her staff to renew it. Suspecting that they were dealing with a caster, they decided to try to ambush her if she were to emerge again. Ulwy, however, could hear them waiting for her, so she and her forces stayed put, while their buffs expired one by one. It was an odd standoff. The party had unknowingly trapped Ulwy and her forces inside. Ulwy's troops are strongest when they're the ones doing the bottlenecking. If they tried to break free from the room, their numbers would be working against them. I decided to break the stalemate by throwing some ghost lions at the party. Gale found himself under attack, and tried retreating into the room in which the Red Hand lay in wait. I opened the door. You see a half-dozen hobgoblins standing at the ready in the darkness. The closest one grins and begins to whirl his dragon chain around his head. I close the door. Ulwy, however, had her unseen servant on doorman duty, and battle was soon joined. They nabbed Gale with the dragon chains, and managed to get him away from the rest of the party, while summoned hellhounds made everyone else's lives difficult. Meanwhile, nobody could tell who this person casting haste and singing bard songs, Starlight by Muse, of course, was, or where she was. Things looked bad, but once Cameron and Carla forced their way into the other room and started carving people up, the tide turned quickly. Sarth dealt with the hellhounds, Emsril used benign transposition to extract Gale, and Ulwy found herself face to face with Blaine. They already knew she was dangerous. She had previously hit Carla with a lightning bolt from her staff for 33 damage, but Blaine was having none of that, and proceeded to toss her around like a ragdoll with setting sun maneuvers. Meanwhile, the rest of the party was cleaning up the remaining hobgoblins. She tried confusion on Gale, but he made his save. She tried to escape with invisibility, but Emsril cast glitter dust. Knowing that the jig was up, she surrendered. This is where it got interesting. She had cast glibness in preparation for the battle. The highest sense motive check in the group was plus 14, so she could get away with almost anything. She made them give her their word that they would let her go if she told them information, and proceeded to tell them lie after lie, every one of which they believed. She told them that a second horde was being formed in the giant Shield Mountains to the northeast, that the Ghost Lord was aiding them willingly, and that she had been coerced into joining the Red Hand. And they believed every word of it. They even felt sorry for her. Imsril wanted to take her stuff, the rest of the party wouldn't let him. They tied her up and apologized before knocking her unconscious, telling her that they would free her before they left. They pressed on and encountered the chamber with the bone drinkers. I had boosted the encounter slightly, making 2 of them full-on bone drinkers. I'm glad I did. The fight was challenging, but I think it would have been too easy with just lesser bone drinkers. +5 grapple check just doesn't cut it. After a fierce battle in which, all things considered, surprisingly few bones were drunk, except Blaine's, and many enemies were brutally smashed into walls by Carla, they destroyed the foul creatures. I was surprised when they decided to stop and rest rather than investigate the strange pool with the dire lion corpse, or the large black spinning stone. The next day, they investigated the rest of the Ghost Lord's lair, finding his diseased, withered tree, his long untouched stash of art, and his treasury. They neglected to take anything from the latter too. They were tempted, but reminded each other that they were there to negotiate. They opened one last secret door, and found themselves face to face with the Ghost Lord. At this point, I told everyone to get on their shoes and coats and follow me outside. I took with me a long hanger rod that I had found in my closet earlier, to use as a Ghost Lord staff. Keep in mind that this was at about 2100 real time, the backyard is lit somewhat spookily, which is why I chose it. I took them out to the yard behind my building, and told them that from then on, everything they said or did would be in character. I then turned, holding my staff, and growled, "Why have you mortals seen fit to intrude upon the sanctity of my lair?" Playing out the negotiation between the party and the Ghost Lord this way was a lot of fun. It's an idea I've been kicking around in my head for some time, dangerously close to LARPing, but I thought it would be a good way to impress upon them the seriousness of the situation and really get them into character without the constant side discussions that often distract from SRSBSNS such as this. The players took to it quickly enough. I'm not the only, former, theater person in the group. Cameron wanted to withhold the phylactery until after the Battle of Brindal, but the Ghost Lord was having none of it. The party would return to him his phylactery that day, or his armies would march on Brindal. Hiding the phylactery elsewhere before negotiating proved to be a very powerful bargaining chip. The Ghost Lord was furious, but much as he wanted to, he couldn't attack without destroying any chance of getting his phylactery back. In the end, he agreed to their terms. Then we went back inside. They returned to the edge of the Thorn Wastes, and retrieved the phylactery. Sarth, Imsril, and Cameron went to deliver it. My pocket watch played the part of the phylactery for this brief exchange, for which we remained indoors. As soon as they handed it over, Imsril Dimension doored them the hell out of there before the Ghost Lord changed his mind. They made it all the way back to the Hammer Fastholds before they realized that they had forgotten to free Ly. They retrieved Ross' body and returned to Brindal, but they took a slight detour north to get a first-hand glimpse of the Horde, who were a few days short of Nimon Gap. Suitably cowed, they got out of there before they were spotted. Arriving in Brindal, they were immediately co-opted into joining the War Council, during which several important decisions were made. Jarmoth and Kal sniped at each other. Ulverth rigorously argued any course of action that would keep his troops safe. Starzinger sat back quietly taking it all in. It was a lot of fun playing so many different roles and having the party involved, even if most of the actual decision-making came down to Cameron's diplomacy check, which I was using as sort of an abstraction. She became everyone's spokeswoman, of sorts. In the end, they decided to keep their forces behind the walls. That one is so obvious that I'm surprised it's even an option. Isn't the whole point of the defensibility of Brindal that it has walls? Create a backup plan if the walls fall. Again, a no-brainer. Ulverth pointed out that none of them had planned for it because nobody wanted to think about it. Distribute the clerics throughout the city. I'm not convinced that this is the wrong choice, but it makes sense if you consider that these are clerics, not soldiers. Give the fourth telepathic link to Celeria Starzinger, as mobility of her elves will be paramount. The players had other ideas that they wanted to implement, burning the cropland so the Horde can't live off of it. Check out this Horde assembling in the north. See if Tirgarun is flying around to the south, so they can take him out. Gain another few thousand XP to make it to 9th level, but it was late, so I wrapped it up there. Session 9. In which our heroes strike a powerful blow against the Horde, and the Horde strikes back. And the Battle of Brindal is on. Took us a while to get there, but it wasn't a diversion, the lead-up was probably the best part. Recall that last session the party successfully negotiated with the Ghost Lord and returned his phylactery in exchange for his indifference. They then returned to Brindal, and sat in on Jarmuth as war council. When we resumed, they still had some matters to deal with. The party went into the war council with 4 objectives. First, they wanted to find out about Keld Dinar, and whether or not they could expect aid. Second, they wanted to investigate the rumors of forces massing in the Giant Shield Mountains. Third, they wanted to search the Southlands for any hint of Tirgarun, the Blue Dragon. Fourth, they wanted to determine the viability of torching the croplands west of Brindal. Based on the fact that the map has an annotation over the small halfling village of Doth saying, "Take prisoners, Tirgarun wants halflings to eat," the players had utterly convinced themselves that this meant Tirgarun was active in the south. Keep in mind that I did nothing to encourage this conclusion. The first 2 matters resolved themselves. Jarmuth told them that they expected to hear back from their emissaries north to Keld Dinar within 2 days, and they did, with the unsurprising news that Keld Dinar would send no aid. Lars Ulverth promised to send out some lions of Brindal to scout out the Giant Shield Mountains. They returned within a few days, reporting that there was nothing to report, and that the rumors, lies planted by Ulwy, recall, were false. This was ultimately good news. A second force would have spelled trouble. We had a brief interlude for Ross' funeral, which was poignant. So they went south, but not before Jarmuth introduced Imsril, a wanderer who had sought them out by the name of Myha Sereni, a red-hand shape-shifting sorcerer spy. She flattered the party with praise and asked to join them in their journey south. I was honestly surprised when they agreed. Gale and Cameron didn't trust her, but that's partially because she cast Tasha's hideous laughter on Gale during some tavern hijinks. He kind of deserved it, though. Sereni's plan was simple. She had a sending stone, Mike, it's a magic radio, and Wormlord Koth had the other. He was moving towards Brindal from the south, and she would tell him when the party was headed his way so he could set up an ambush, the marked for death encounter, with Wormlord Koth swapping out a greater Barghest. At some point along the way, she would make off with the staff of Stormaclouds and anything else she could get her hands on. It didn't go quite as planned. Imsril summoned up a half-dozen phantom steeds and they covered the 80 miles to Doth in the space of a day. This gave Myha Sereni no chance to make off with their equipment, but Koth was ready for them. The ambush went off beautifully. They had dismounted, and were approaching the bait, when Koth and the dragon spawn attacked from the foliage. The party decided to run for it, and made it back to their mounts, which Koth promptly fireballed, destroying all the mounts except Imsril's, who had already started running, since he used most of his spell slots on phantom steeds. They considered escaping on foot, then Koth dropped haste, and they realized they would have to fight their way out. It was a tough battle, but Gale killed Koth with some well-placed arrows, and Imsril blinded half the dragon spawn with glitter dust. The tide quickly turned. Spoiler. Show. Myha Sereni was expecting Koth to pull his punches with her. She was as surprised as anyone when his forces targeted her along with everyone else. She did the only natural thing and fought back, and in doing so earned some of the party's trust. After the battle, in which they hit 9th level, they rested in a rope trick, and Gale awoke from trance to find Myha and the staff gone. He tracked her prince to the outskirts of Doth, but she had anticipated this and had drunk her potion of fly to get some distance away to make her tracks untraceable. Gale, Cameron, and Blaine tried to investigate in Doth, but at 0100 hours they weren't getting anywhere. They were furious, but they realized that they simply wouldn't be able to find her. They asked around in Doth the next morning. Nobody had seen or heard of either Myha Sereni or a blue dragon. They spent a day searching around Doth Forest before realizing that they were probably wasting their time, and returned to Brindal. Their plan to torch the croplands depended in part on the staff of Stormaclouds, and so the party began focusing their energies on training the militia, all of them except for Imsril, who, with the acquisition of Teleport, had an idea, a terrible, awful idea. You see, Imsril realized that with SCRY plus Teleport plus Sealrighty plus Teleport, they had a good chance of assassinating. Well, at first they were planning on revenge against Myha Sereni, but when they cast SCRY on her, note that every save against scrying made during this session failed, they saw her cavorting with Wormlord Karn and realized that they had bigger fish to fry. Imsril prepared a scroll of Teleport, and the next evening cast SCRY on Wormlord Karn, whom he had seen through his scrying of Miha Sereni the day before. They saw him sleeping in his tent with his 2 consorts. Their plan was to teleport in, take out Karn in the surprise round, then seal righty plus teleport out before anyone could react. That's exactly what they did. Imsrel teleported himself, Cameron, Gale, and Blaine. Their arrival awoke Karn, but he was still surprised. Gale and Blaine attacked Mist, thanks to the darkness, but Cam, wearing Gale's scout's headband for dark vision, hit him with a devastating sneak attack, 1 initiative, and hit him again. Karn's shouts brought 8 Black Spawn Raider guards running, and Karn's consorts, a war adept and a war priest, began to cast spells, but the damage had been done. Imsrel cast seal righty in / I teleported / I out. Scratch another Wormlord. This act elevated them in the eyes of the soldiers from heroes to gods. The story of the audacious attack was amplified with each retelling, until it was said that Blaine and Gale held off half the horde while Cam locked Karn in single combat. It was a great boost to morale for the people of Brindal, and a heavy blow to the morale of the horde. It delayed them by another day. They continued to train the militia, with varying success. That charisma bonus mattered a lot. Imsrel continued to scry on Miha Sereni, and noted with curiosity that she had left the horde and started making her way towards the Wormsmoke Mountains, towards the Fane, but they don't know that. He also spent some time strategically placing walls of stone around the city. We'll see how useful those prove in the battle to come. On day 47, September 23, 2258, the horde made camp on the outskirts of Brindal. The militia and the party steeled themselves, and that night, they attacked. The battle began with 2 groups of hill giants acting as artillery and bombarding the walls. I wrote a cute little Python script to keep track of the state of the walls. I'll post source if anyone's interested. The party ran through the west gate to take out one group while Ulvertha's men dealt with the other. They charged the giants, who were slow to react but put out some serious hurt once they got into melee, dropping Blaine to -9. Only Imsrel's use of glitter dust, blinding 2 of the 4 giants, saved the day. Cameron took out one of the giants with 114 damage in a single round, a full round attack with 3 attacks, all of which hit, 1 of which crit. He was blinded, so they were all sneak attacks. She took Craven at 9th level. This hurts me, but I allowed it for a reason. They'll need her damage output in the battles to come, and she won't always be able to rely on getting sneak attacks and full attacks. They killed 3 giants, the 3rd was blinded, and by this point they had a few hundred hobgoblins bearing down on their position. They beat a hasty retreat back to the safety of the archers in the walls, only to learn that Ulvertha's men had failed, and the southern wall had been breached. They started moving south to reinforce the wall, but just then Abithrea swooped in and started causing serious property damage. We wrapped up there for the night,